get started here. Just a couple of things. This is Daniel over here. He's with Ali Pointer Maquetto, and he's watching the people on Zoom. We do have a number of people participating via Zoom. Just be patient with us as we switch back and forth between microphone inputs and everything. We want to make sure that everybody can hear. So when we do get to a spot where we're asking some questions, or you guys are asking questions and everything, we will try and repeat the question so everybody in Zoom can hear what the question was. This meeting is being recorded. We do have a website set up where we are posting the video of these meetings and copies of the slides. So if you want to go watch it again, you can certainly do that. Or if you know of people who wanted to be at the meeting, but for whatever reason they couldn't, you can direct them to that website. And I'll show you what that link is here later on in the meeting. As I mentioned, we're going to ask you to participate in a survey at the end of the meeting. We would like you to use your smartphone. That's the best way for us to gather that information. If you don't have a smartphone or a smart device, we do have some paper copies for you that we'll pass out at that particular time. Tonight, we want to just kind of recap where we've been with this process. Again, this is the second meeting in our community engagement process. Briefly touch on the facilities assessment. The first meeting had a lot of information on that. Each one of these meetings builds upon each other. We have the survey results from that community engagement meeting number one. We have some financial information. We have Matt Gillespie with Piper Sandler here tonight. He is the school's financial consultant. We also have some ideas to present to you. These are not solutions or things that we think are, something you need to implement. It's just ideas to get that discussion going. Maybe there's some topics and some things here that are emotional. Maybe there are some things here that are tough topics to go through and to have those conversations on, but if they're ideas to stimulate discussion so we can get that going, figure out where the priorities are, what the needs are, what the wants are. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to ask you for your opinion through a survey on that at the end of the meeting. Again, the team for this process, my name is Derek O'Neill. I'm with Ali Pointer Maquetto Architecture. We also have Boyd Jones, your construction manager. That's Emily Bannock over there representing Boyd Jones. I mentioned Daniel Conway here. He's also with Ali Pointer Maquetto. We have a couple of engineering partners with ETI Engineering and Larson Engineering. And then obviously all of you as community members and patrons of the school district. I do like to ask if there are any school board members here, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand just so everybody can see you all in attendance. We do have a facilities committee that has helped formulate some questions, provided some input. So if anybody is on the facilities committee or attended those meetings, if you'd raise your hand also. Very good, appreciate it. Just quickly about Ali Pointer, we have our dedication of put people first, advance design, and build communities. Those are three things that we instill in every project we do, whether it's a school project, a housing project, any type of project. We have 66 people. We've been in business since 1987. We've done a lot of K-12 projects. We love doing this work in Southwest Iowa in particular. Our goal is for all schools we work with to be the school of choice. Again, it's not about, we don't feel that we're not out here trying to compete schools or pit schools against each other by any means. The competition really is the metropolitan areas to the rural areas. And the stronger we can make every school district in rural Iowa, the better off we are as a whole in rural Iowa. A couple of the goals from this process: safety and security of all students and staff, provide environments that enhance and improve the educational experience for all students and staff, maximize existing square footage and space, enhance community pride in the school system, move forward with a community-based solution. And then there's obviously going to be some other goals and objectives that come from this process that we will put up there on that board. Our process, you're going to hear me talk about this over and over and over, but our process is: where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? We've gone through the where are we now phase. That's the facilities assessment. The where do we want to be? We're going to start that process here tonight with these ideas to stimulate discussion. And then how do we get there? Is this a master plan that the school board is going to adopt, and we're going to implement some first phase of that to get to a long-term plan? That's kind of what this process will unfold, and see what the community will support in that. I'd like to get as many people to these meetings as possible. The more input we get and the bigger cross section of the community that we have, and the communities that the school district is made up of, the bigger cross section we can get at these meetings, the better the outcome. People that are for the schools, against the schools, have never had anything to do with the schools, whatever that is, we want as many people as possible to come to these meetings. You'll hear me talk about implementation concepts. We have short-term, mid-range, long-term. We will identify things that need to happen in the next 12 months, things that need to happen in the next 5 years, things in that 6 to 10 and then 10+ year time frame. Again, where are we now? Where do we want to be, and how do we get there? So these ideas that we present later on tonight to stimulate some discussion. Again, we take your input, we refine those ideas. We bring more ideas back. We get input, we refine them again. It's a process that we go through multiple times to get to a point where we feel we have a solution that the community will support, that meets the needs and everything and the priorities of the school district, and that everybody can get behind. We do an 8-step process. I went through a lot of that at the last meeting. I'm not going to go through every piece of that for this meeting, but we assess the current deficiencies and needs. So we've been through all of the facilities. We use 3D scanners. We talk to the facilities and the maintenance people. What are the problems? What are the long-term problems? What are things that have been fixed recently? We look at old drawings, historical data, all of those pieces. We look at it from a code standpoint, accessibility, life safety. We look at any operational deficiencies. Just having multiple school buildings in different communities creates operational deficiencies versus if you were all in one town or all in one building. Educating a diverse community committee. Again, this is when I talk about wanting that good cross section of people from the communities to participate in these meetings. We will create options and scenarios based on all of this. We'd like to get to a point where we have focus groups. So if you are here because you have a particular interest in one area of the school, maybe you are activities or music, technology, any of those pieces, we'd create focus groups to gather additional information as we refine these ideas and bring them back to you. We'll look at sources and uses of funding, and that's particularly why Matt is here tonight to go through that with you. That process is, you need to hear that a number of times in order to understand all the different mechanisms that schools have for operation, and then that there are certain components of those budgets and those funding mechanisms that can only be spent on facilities. You can't get into this argument of paying teachers with certain funds when those are just dedicated for facilities and sticks and bricks and buses and things like that. I mentioned wanting to have a master plan. So we may have this idea of where we want to go, but we can only bite off one piece of it right now. What we don't want to do is get you to a spot where we have built you into a corner where you don't have that flexibility to change and adapt as you grow into the future. And hopefully by the time we get to the end of this process, we will have this master plan that the facilities committee will make a recommendation to the school board, and the school board will adopt. So the where are we now piece. We've gone through all of your facilities. We have done the assessments. We've looked at the floor plans. You have your elementary building here, 43,000 square feet, very new facility. We've gone through a programmatic piece. You'll hear me talk about top down and bottom up programmatic assessment. So not only do we look at, what's the condition of the roof, what's the condition of the mechanical systems, the heating and cooling, the plumbing. We also look at the spaces, how the spaces are utilized, the square footage that you have in those spaces, how that relates to each student, And so that's kind of the bottom up. This chart represents the detailed piece of the bottom up. The top down component is then when we look at a high level view of if you have 100 students in your school district, we would take those 100 students times a 200 square foot factor, and then that gives us a baseline high level square footage of what we need to be looking at. And we use that to evaluate if you have too much or too little space amongst your buildings or across the uses for those facilities. A number of things that we heard and we observed, a long bullet point list of things here. Again, there's not, with the elementary building, as new as it is, there's not a lot to be concerned about in that particular facility. The only thing that we would note is the secure entry. While you do have the access control piece of it, most of the schools we're working with nowadays, they get to a Z-trap scenario. So as a visitor or a guest, you can walk in the front set of doors and you are immediately directed into the office space to sign in or check in, get a visitor badge before you ever have access to the school. That's something that's fairly easily corrected over there at that school. Most of your buildings, that's something that is fairly easily corrected, but it is something to be aware of as we move forward. You don't have any immediate things that need to be addressed that should cost you any money. There are a number of warranty related items that were noted on our walkthrough that we should follow up on that could be fixed under warranty based on the age of the building. This is how that building scores. You'll see this score sheet across all of your buildings. We use 4 main categories: site analysis, exterior, interior, and MEPT. That is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and technology. I get used to using acronyms all day long, every day, working as an architect with schools. If I give you an acronym and I don't explain what it is, please just raise your hand or ask the question. I will try to make sure I explain what all of those are as we move forward. But again, the elementary building, purely based on age and the systems that you have in it, that scores at a 9.3. This is where it falls on the overall chart. You're going to see us chart out all of your schools on here. Again, there's some descriptions across the bottom. A 10 being basically a brand new school, a 5, a building that's around 20 years old. You have some life left in your systems, but you're also approaching a need for replacement of certain things: roofs, mechanical systems, fire alarm components, maybe some finishes, things like that. So that's the elementary building. We also looked at the middle school building, 40,000 square feet, built in 1950, with some improvements in 1999 and 2009. Again, we've gone through the individual space program here. You'll see our high level look at this in just a little bit. If you were at the previous meeting, you know what I'm talking about, but this is the individual space. So this is the bottom up programmatic analysis. Things that we've heard, and things that we see. In the next 12 months, you need to continue with your roof maintenance over there. There are some gutter and drainage issues that we observed, particularly on the facades of the building, that maybe need to be addressed. Short term, in that 1 to 5 year range, there's the secure entrance piece that we mentioned earlier, ADA accessibility, reviewing your programmatic needs. Again, you'll see some of what we're talking about there and in these ideas to stimulate discussion. There's some HVAC corrections over there that need to be done. Your HVAC is your heating and cooling in your buildings. Those are some things that you need to be looking at, correcting. Fire alarm and technology pieces, as the age of the building, as your fire alarm systems become no longer supported by the manufacturer. The internet has done wonders to be able to extend the lives of those systems. If you have maintenance guys who know how to use eBay, you can get on there and find parts a lot of times and extend the life of those systems. At some point though, you just need to be aware that those systems need to be updated and changed. Long-term needs over there: continued heating and cooling, energy efficiency and the lighting upgrades, continued exterior maintenance. You've done some window and door replacement over there. You should continue doing that. And then at some point, if you do a major project over there, you'd have to consider fire sprinklers. This is how the middle school building scores out. Again, site analysis, exterior, interior, and your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and technology scores at a 5.7. So on the chart, again, you've got newer systems over there, newer construction to go along with the original part of the building. For the age of the building and the maintenance that you've got, this is where most all of schools in Southwest Iowa, based on the age and the condition, they're going to score right in here. So there's nothing to jump up and down and be excited about. That's a 5.7 on a scale of 10. The high school building here, 80,000 square feet, originally built in 1968, with additions and improvements in 1990, parking lot in 2007, 2009, and then a recent kind of some roof improvements. Again, programmatically from the bottom up, the detailed pieces. This is there for your reference. These slides are available at the end of the meeting on the website that we talked about there. Lots of different things we've heard as we did our walkthrough in this building. Lots of things that are just outdated, need replaced, purely based on the age of the facility. You have there is nothing that we've identified that needs to be done in the immediate 0 to 12 month time frame. In the 1 to 5 years, you need to continue with your roof replacement plans. Again, revising your entry sequence to create that Z-trap. As I mentioned, most of your buildings are lucky that you have your entries and your offices right there off the entries. A little bit of remodeling can create that secure piece of having your visitors go straight into the office before they get access to the building. As you get into any type of heating and cooling replacement in a project like this, lighting upgrades, at some point the state fire marshal is going to say, okay, you're to a point where you're starting these renovations, you're above the ceilings, you need to complete your fire sprinkling in the building. You do have some fire sprinklers here. It's time to get the whole building sprinklered, update your fire alarm system, all of that. So that's just something to be aware of as you start getting into the ceilings and doing that work above the ceilings for your heating and cooling and your electrical needs. There's some miscellaneous plumbing issues, some handicap accessibility issues that we need to address, locker room concerns. We've noted in here that, classrooms, as you begin to look at classroom space, 21st century learning environments, and certainly COVID has changed a little bit on how we set up our classrooms and look at our common spaces also. So for the high school facility, again, with the four components, site, exterior, interior, and your mechanical, electrical, this scores at approximately a 5.3. And that's where you're at on your chart. Again, nothing to be excited about, just gives you a baseline on the where are we now piece as we start talking about where we might want to go with any of this. This is all three of your buildings on that chart, so you can see where you're at in the overall big picture of things. This is a chart that we've updated since the last meeting with the 2020-21 enrollment numbers. And you can start to see that this is our top-down programmatic view. So we've taken that bottom up, identified all the spaces, all the square footage. Now we're looking at it from a top-down piece on where are some, with one of those goals on there of maximizing existing square footage and space within the district. Are there things that we can recommend to you besides just going and building a new building or doing an addition to capture space? Perhaps when we look at something like this, with your elementary building being pretty well at capacity now, your brand new building there, your capacity with the amount of students you have there. We have a middle school building that can house 215 students, has 143. And then here at the high school building with the 80,000 square foot you have here, a building that can handle 400 students, and you have approximately 200 students. So are there some things that we could do to help you shift any of your student population around that also takes away from that puts people in different buildings, students in different buildings, as opposed to doing additions for any of those buildings to handle any of those different growth areas? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. We want to go through the results of the survey from the first meeting that we had. We asked where everybody was from. The majority of the people that responded were from Greenfield. We had around 40 responses, I think, total on this survey. We did leave it open for a couple of weeks after that meeting. I'm not sure how many we got after the actual meeting, but in total, we had about 40 responses on here. A majority of the responses, 23 from Greenfield, 9 from Fontenelle, 6 from rural or other, and then 2 from the Bridgewater area. The question on balancing aspirations, the first that everybody agreed on was retain quality staffing. That's an important one to remember, because as you start to go through needing to make improvements to your facilities, you're going to see that it's really about taking pressure off the general fund. The general fund is what you pay for your teachers with. And if you are constantly pulling dollars out of that for maintenance items, upgrades, replacements, that takes away from what you have to then pay for your teachers or retain that quality staffing. Second on that list, facility that supports learning needs of every student, then high quality education while maintaining a small rural school feel, update current buildings and prepare for future growth, maintain K-12 learning environments that serve a diversity of students, maintain appropriate class sizes, fewer and newer buildings, and becoming a destination school district. Under managing concerns, again, recruitment and retention of top educators. You see a trend here amongst some of these questions about keeping your teachers, keeping your high quality teachers, and recruiting good teachers to your district. Second on that list, financial ability to maintain quality education, then space for new and existing programs. Fourth is maintain a budget that meets student needs. Fifth is community support. Sixth is fix current issues versus preparing for future concerns. Then enrollment decline. And then at the bottom, right sizing potential changes, having too much or too little space. It's interesting that that falls to 8th on the list. I did have that chart in there that's kind of our top down list of, for example, a high school building that can house 400 students, you only have 200. Same with your middle school facility, and then an elementary building that is at capacity. Assigning priorities. Safety and security for students and staff is first. Upgrade mechanical electrical systems is second. Improve existing classroom space, creating collaboration space is third. Fourth, improve industrial arts, CTE, and STEM. CTE is career technical education. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. You may hear us once in a while say STEAM instead of STEM. We're adding arts to that component as you look at the overall science, technology, engineering, arts, and math piece. Upgrade technology, code compliance, consolidation of buildings. Down at 8th is athletic fields and gyms. And then 9th is an early education daycare component. Defining inspiration. First is your STEAM or your STEM room. Again, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Then technology at second. Collaboration space at third. Fourth is recreation, fitness, wellness, and nutrition. Then we have nursing and medical, fabrication labs, robotic labs, performing arts, music creation, and culinary arts down at the bottom. Goals from this process. First, security and safety of all students. Enhance and improve the educational experience. Then balance educational activities and environments. Maximize existing square footage at 4th. Develop a community-based solution. Enhance community pride. Just fix what we have down at 7. And then 8, fewer and newer buildings. We did ask some open-ended questions. I'm not going to read every one of these comments. You can catch up on those if you want to download this online. But what would you like to see out of this process? More hands-on opportunities and less computer usage is one. Figure out how we make the most of what we have. Clear out the junk around facilities. We'll give space for transportation and parking needs. Do what is best for students, staff, and staying on budget. Both short-term and long-term goals allow for futuristic planning, not just fixing the current needs. I'd like to see emotions put aside and see the community support it. Bring more diversity to the community, provide more elective options. Combining buildings is a bad idea. cost-effective facilities, state-of-the-art education, attract teachers, keep activity facilities up to competition levels. Next, we've got some financial assessment and some financial information that we want to give, that we want your consultant here, Piper Sandler and Matt Gillespie, to go through. Yeah.
Good evening. Myself a call handed out to you, so if you did not get one of those and want one, you can raise your hand and we can get one to you. This packet is kind of a summary or a short version, if you can believe it, of what I usually hand out, for example, to your school board, or for those of you that are actually on the facilities committee. You went through a packet like this with me not too long ago, but it was much larger than this. So we'll try to keep this as short as possible, but when you start to discuss these types of facility improvements, it's important to understand how and if you can even afford to do them, and how much can you do without requiring any kind of input or any addition to property taxes, and what you can do if you would agree and allow property tax increases, etc. So if you go to the third page, at the top of that page, it says 4 primary funding sources. So sort of as your architects discussed earlier, the school district has several different funds, but they can't all be used universally for any need. The school's general fund, for example, which is the largest of the funds, that's what's used to pay primarily teacher salaries. About 80% of the entire general fund is used to pay staff and payroll. So none of that, for the most part, is used for infrastructure needs. The school district could buy a school bus out of that fund every once in a while and do some minor things, but you're not going to build new buildings or do major improvements out of the general fund. That's not what that fund is for. But then you also, on the other hand, have sales tax fund and a couple fund. Those funds are exclusively for infrastructure improvement. And infrastructure can also mean not just buildings, but it also means transportation, so school buses, technology, computers, one-to-one type things like that, and general maintenance, not just building new things, but just keeping up what you already have. So painting, carpeting, tuck pointing, those types of things. So on this page, you see the 4 primary sources, which of course, number 1 is cash, but school districts really don't have tons of cash sitting around unless one of you wants to write a giant check to the school. And I'm sure if you would like to do that, Paul would love to take that check right now and start building buildings. So it really falls to the other 3 things that are on this page, which is sales tax revenue, the PEPL levy, which is physical plant and equipment levy, PPEL, and then of course, general obligation bonds, which is what you just recently issued to build the elementary school. So within each of those 3 sources, there are limitations, either tax levy limitations or just revenue limitations as it comes to sales tax bonds. So rather than go through every one of the bullet points, which you can do, I'm just going to hit on the amounts so that you understand what those amounts are, because ultimately, when the community decides what they really want to do, if anything, what that amount might be, let's say it's 3 million, let's say it's 13 million, let's say it's 20 million, whatever you decide, then you can look at this page and determine exactly how you might be able to fund that. So sales tax revenue bonds is a relatively new, but it's been around for about 20 years though. That's kind of the primary way that schools are being funded in the last decade or so. Although in the last few years, we've had a kind of resurgence of voted general obligation bonds. Your community obviously approved a general obligation bond recently, and there have been lots of schools around the state that have done that in the last 3 years in particular. So sales tax revenue bonds, of course, does not impact property taxes. So that is an advantage for those of you that don't like to pay property taxes, and I don't know anybody that likes to pay that property tax. And there are kind of 2 main levels to which the school district could borrow. You can borrow short-term, and some schools are restricted to borrowing from short-term because they haven't held a certain election called a revenue purpose statement election. You actually did do that just in February, I believe. So that's not restricting your community anymore. But some school boards and some committees just don't like to borrow long-term because you pay more interest. Obviously, those things start to add up. So you see two examples there. And the borrowing through only 2030, again, that's not a restriction for your district. It's just an example of a shorter term borrowing. But you could probably fund about $4.3 million in improvements if the board decided to fund something from the short-term sales tax bond. And if you wanted to borrow for a full 20-year term from sales tax, which you have, the board has the authority to do that, they could probably fund upwards of $6.6 million. And of course, that again does not impact property taxes, because that's simply from the sales tax that we all pay all around the state. And that tax is distributed to every district equally now, and it did not used to be equal, but it is now. So it's based off of just the number of students who physically live in your school district, but it's not limited in any way to the amount of retail sales, for example, that are generated in your county. Before that tax was made equal several years ago, you can imagine schools in Polk County and Dallas County and Lynn County, Potawatomi County, where there's lots and lots of retail activity going on, much of which is coming from you, who don't live in those counties, but you go there to shop. So you were dropping your money there and then stay there and help those schools. That is no longer the case. So these amounts that you're seeing here are the result of fair and equitable distribution of that sales tax. Then you see item number 3, which is the PEPL. Again, that's the physical plant and equipment levy. That's a voted levy, and it is a property tax. And most schools in the state do have that levy at one level or another, but your district does not. And it is a voted levy, which requires 50% plus 1 approval in the ballot to get it approved. The election itself is not approving borrowing a certain amount or building a certain thing. The ballot simply asks people, will you fund or will you accept this tax levy at this level for up to 10 years? And it could be less. If the board wanted to only make it 9 years or 7 years or 4 years, that's fine. You just can't have it be more than 10 years. And the maximum levy could be as $1.34, and that's $1.34 per $1,000 of property valuation, which we'll talk more about in just a second. Most schools, though, have it for either 67 cents or $1.34. There are some that have an odd number, $1.82, 61 cents, some odd thing. But most schools that have it have 67 or $1.34. So those are the two examples that you see here. If you were willing to support a voted couple at the level of 67 cents, and then the school board decided to borrow against that future collection for 10 years, they could fund somewhere right around 1.8 million. And if you had the maximum levy of $1.34, they could fund upwards of 3.7 million. And these things, this one and the next one that are property tax related, they're also going to be dependent on where interest rates are, obviously, and where your property valuation is at the time that the school might borrow. So if interest rates go up, you can borrow less in any of these examples. If interest rates go down, you can borrow more. And if your property value goes up, you can borrow more. If your property value goes down, you can borrow less. So these are not absolute numbers, they're estimates. And then item number 4 is the general obligation bond. So that's what you guys just did vote on here a few years ago. You issued those bonds and you funded the elementary school. That's a larger borrowing and requires 60% approval, so supermajority. But the school can then borrow for up to 20 years. So it's not limited to 10 like a voted couple, and they can borrow up to 20 years. And again, it doesn't have to be 20. If the amount that the district needs can be repaid in 17 or 15 or 10 or 9 years, that's okay too. It just can't be longer than 20. And again, there are also 2 general limits. One is $2.70. That's the tax levy, and that would generate around $6.5 million right now. And the maximum levy in Iowa is $4.05. If you need to exceed $2.70 because the size of the borrowing requires a higher levy, you have to ask a second question on that ballot. And that second question is also going to require 60% approval. So it becomes very difficult to get that type of thing approved. Although there are about 104 or 105 schools in the state, which is about a third of the schools in the state have that type of authority because they have voted at some time in the past If you needed or wanted to go to that higher level, the school could generate somewhere around $12.6 million to fund an infrastructure project. And then you can start adding these things together as well. So if you thought, for example, or if you knew that the project that you ultimately determined is needed would require 10 million, let's say, well, 10 million, if you're looking at item number 4, obviously 10 million is higher than 6.5 million. So to get 10 million out of a general obligation bond, you'd have to ask the second question, 60% approval for both. That becomes difficult. But you could decide to still ask the $2.70 bond question. That would generate about 6.5 million. And then you could supplement it with the $1.34 voted couple, which would only require a 50% election, shorter repayment, so it's going to cost less over time because there's less interest. But those two things could get you $10 million, for example. And then, of course, if you really had a large project, you could pick the largest one from each of those sections and add them together. But before you were to do that, and I don't think that's where you're going to go, but if that is where you were going, we would want to make sure for sure that the extra money, because in this case, when you borrow from sales tax in particular, you do not obligate every single penny. There's always extra money that is reserved, and we want to make sure that there's enough money reserved for those routine things that the district does use those funds for, which is school bus purchases and leases, technology, general repair and upkeep. So we wouldn't want to obligate everything, because then the school couldn't even fund the buses that they need. So before you borrow from both sales tax and PEPL, if that were to be your plan, we would want to make sure that there was still enough for those other needs. And now we're going to also talk about on the next page, just where your tax levy is right now. I'm not going to talk a lot about this because you can take this home and absorb it. But the top table on that next page shows where you are compared to other districts in the state that are up to 50 students more and 50 students less than you. So roughly the size of your school district, not having anything to do with the location of the school, the wealth levels of the school, just simply where their enrollment is. So these are schools that would be generally your size. And you can see that those tax levy rates range from $10.42, now this is the total school levy, up to $18.24, and you're right in the middle there at $13.45. And then in both of these examples, I also put in the highest and the lowest school in the state, the lowest being Remsen Union and the highest being Perry. So Perry has a tax rate of $20.55, Remsen Union $8.04. But Remsen Union doesn't have their own high school either, they share. And so there are lots of school districts around the state that share. So those districts oftentimes have a lower tax rate because they're not funding the entire cost of a K-12 education. And then the bottom table would be the districts that are contiguous with you. So those school districts that are right here around your district, your neighbors. And there you can see the lowest tax rate of Fremont Mills, $12.28, and the highest at Glenwood, $15.98. And it's not simply because of bonds that cause those differences. So that's important to note. And then down at the bottom, again, I'm not going to go through that, but you should read that because a district or a city or a county that has a different tax rate than their neighbor or than some other school or city or county in the state, just because one's higher or lower does not mean that the school board or the city council or the board of supervisors is doing a bad job or that they're not managing it, because there's lots and lots of things that go into that tax rate. Some things can cause your tax rate to go down, some things can cause them to go up. So it's important that you understand that. So it appears that your tax rate is right kind of in the middle in both of these scenarios. That doesn't mean it's good and that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that that's where it is, period. Then you can go to the next page, and in the top right corner of that page, to make sure you're on the same page as I am, there should be a little skinny box that says general obligation school bonds. So this is just one of the examples, and this one in particular is the $2.70 general obligation bond. So you can see that in the far column with that fat arrow pointing down. So even though you just issued bonds just 4 or 5 years ago to fund the elementary, you have built capacity, or you've opened up capacity to borrow more money at that same tax levy. And in the last couple of years, something that your school board has been doing, you would know this if you paid close attention to their budget, but I don't think probably most of you pay that close attention to their budget, which in this case is unfortunate, because the school board has already been levying $2.70, because what they've done in the last 3 years is levy something called a surplus levy. So that's extra money that they've been levying within the bond debt service fund. So they've been levying that $2.70 levy, even though the bonds themselves did not require a $2.70 levy, because your property value has grown to some degree since the bonds were originally issued. And those extra monies are then used to prepay the bonds. And for no other reason. They cannot use them for teacher salaries or to pay the superintendent a bonus or to pay your architects. None of that. They can only be used to pay the bond off early. So what the school board has been doing, which is a very good idea and is showing that they are being good stewards of your money, in my opinion, is that they've been making prepayments. Just like if you or I were to walk into your bank and say, I want to pay an extra $1,000 on my mortgage. If you could do that over and over and over again, you would start to save enormous amounts of money and you'd pay your mortgage off much faster. That's what your school board has been doing. So the advantage of it, the main advantage, obviously, they're saving you money. And I have the actual amount, I'll tell you real quick, to get interest to you. They've taken this action for the last 3 years on the elementary bonds. And just so far, they may continue to do it, or they may not. It's an annual decision. But they so far have saved you, as property owners, $163,800 in interest that will never have to be paid because those bonds are going to be paid off sooner than they otherwise would have. So that's an obvious advantage. The other advantage, if you think this is an advantage, is that you're already used to paying $2.70. You've been paying $2.70, whether you do it or not. You've been paying that levy now for several years. So on this page, you see a bond that would require about a $2.70 levy. You could generate around $6.5 million, and you wouldn't be paying any more out of your pocket in property taxes than you would become accustomed to paying. Now, you would be paying it for a longer period of time, because the elementary building would be paid off right now in fiscal year 35 or fiscal year 36, and this new bond wouldn't be paid off perhaps until fiscal year 42. So you wouldn't be paying it for a longer period of time, but on an annual basis, it wouldn't be impeding your ability to fund other things that you have in your own personal life, because you're already paying that tax levy. Now, if the need of the district and what the community decides they want to require the $4.05 levy, that would generate more money, but obviously that would then require a tax levy increase of some sort. And the page after that, there are two tables on there. These are the Pebble examples. So what you see in the top one, and again, look at the far right column, the top table is showing a levy of about 67 cents. The bottom one about $1.34. Remember, I said those are the two main levies that most schools have. You do not have either one. But if you did that, then you could fund that roughly 1.7 to 3.7 million. That would be a tax increase, 67 cents or $1.34. Or again, it could be some lesser amount. If you didn't need the full 3.7 million, that would be possible. 50% approval to get that passed. And then if you go to the next page, and the last two pages are really the same, except they just start looking at different tax levies. So if you look in the top kind of right section of this page, you see a little box that's shaded that has the number 67 cents. So this is an example of what it would cost you out of your own pocket if you own property in this school district. And that's important to remember too. You have to live in the district to pay the tax. Just because you work here or your kids go to school here, if you live in Des Moines and you open and enroll your kid here because you come to work here, you're not paying this tax. The people that live here and own property are paying the tax. And likewise, on a little bit separate topic, when it comes to an election, if you have people that actually live in Texas or live in Florida or live in Arizona in the winter time, if they are legal residents of those states, they do not vote here. They may own property here. This may be their hometown. This may be where their family lives. They don't get to vote here. You can only vote in one place, wherever you legally reside. But going back to this worksheet, 67 cents. You see there what it would cost you if you own property in the school district, and for that matter, the city or the county also. These are the same calculations no matter what municipality we're talking about. But if the school district was going to have a voted PEPAL, for example, of 67 cents, so that would generate revenue to build something, 50% approval. You can see on the left side what the assessed value of a residential home might be. There is rollback applied to that homestead credit. So you're not paying taxes on the full value of your home. That's really important to understand because many people use what they perceive to be the market value of their home and then start to apply the taxation to that number. But that's not correct because we use the assessed value and then also apply something called rollback. And if you guys want to ask questions about rollback, go for it, but I'm going to leave that alone for now. But I'll definitely talk about it if you want. I can talk for hours. Most of those of you that don't need to know. So if you, for example, had a $100,000 home and the school was going to levy 67 cents, many people would mistakenly assume that that was going to be a $67 increase to them. The 67 cents times the 100,000 of dollars, because we're always talking about $1,000 increments or mills when we talk about property taxes. But in reality, if you look at that worksheet and follow along, that $100,000 home would actually pay about $34 per year for that 67-cent levy that would bring the school district, if that was one of the funding sources you chose, about $1.8 million. And then you can see commercial property and agricultural property. The agricultural property is where there's another huge difference because many people, again, mistakenly, try to calculate it off of the market value of their land, and market value of the land is not included, it's not used in taxation in any way, shape, or form. So if you mistakenly thought you could sell your land for $6,000 or $7,000 an acre, and then you took 6 or 7 thousands times the 67 cents times the number of acres you may own, you'd come up with a massive number, which would definitely scare you away and probably make you vote no. Would make me vote no. But the real calculation begins with the assessed value of that property. And what you see there in the bold number in the middle of that bottom section, 1,039, that is the actual average assessed value of 1 acre of farmland in Adair County as of last year. And then there's also rollback applied to that. So ultimately, if you are an ag land owner and you own average land in Adair County, you're paying taxes on about $873 per acre. And we're talking about $1,000 increments. So that's 0.873, because it's not even one full thousand, right? 0.873 times the 67 cents, or about 58 cents per year per acre. And then down at the bottom, you can see various numbers of acres that a person might own. If you own 320 acres, which would be roughly the average, I think, around much of the state, it might cost you about $187 a year for that 67-cent PEPAL that would bring the district a certain amount of money for a project. And then the back page is the same exact thing, but what if it was the $1.34 tax levy? So obviously it's about double, not quite double, because the homestead credit is only applied once, it doesn't get to be double, but it's roughly double what 67 cents would be. And you'll notice that I don't have the $2.70, because as I said before, you're already paying $2.70. So if that happened to be the funding mechanism that you decided you wanted the school board to pursue, you can generate that larger amount, and it's not going to cost you more money out of your pocket, so to speak. Now, yes, if you didn't do it at all, if none of this brings any project whatsoever, the school board can continue to levy $2.70 if that's what they choose to do. They pay your debt off very quickly. There are a number of schools in the state that are doing that. Fairfield and Johnston They've paid off 20-year bonds in 10 years or less, saving multi-million dollars of interest costs for the patrons. So that could be an option too. If nothing gets done here, you don't need projects, or the community doesn't feel they do. Sure, the tax levy could drop away and you stop paying taxes sooner, that is true. But it also could not be painful, so to speak. I can continue that tax levy and produce more funding for some projects that you may believe that the district needs. So any questions about what you see in this packet? Just one thing real quickly. If you go, you don't have to go back to the page, but the page that shows the $2.70 bond, in all of these examples, the interest rate that I'm using is significantly higher than what it really would be today, because you haven't approved anything. You may not do any of this. So the earliest that you could be issuing new debt would be next spring, a year from now, and we don't know where interest rates could be. So I've intentionally used higher interest rates than what it would be if it was today. So two things: if you decide to do something that requires a bond, and you issue that bond next spring, and if interest rates remain about where they are today, that means you can either borrow more, or borrowing the same amount, in this case about $6.5 million, would require a lower tax rate if interest rates are where they are today. And the second thing I want to point out, where you see that interest rate in the third from the left column, again, I'm using a number much higher than what it would be today, 3%, which might sound really low to you. Just yesterday, I was at Comanche School District. They issued bonds that they have already approved, and that interest rate averaged 1.87. So truly, if the interest rate stays similar to where it is today, and you decided that you wanted to fund something with a bond, there's a very good chance that all of the expenses that you see in this packet would be lower than what they're showing in this packet. But of course, if interest rates do rise, then maybe they'll be closer to what this results in. And of course, if they just skyrocket, which I don't think anybody thinks that's going to happen in the near future, but we don't know, we don't have the crystal ball. If they were to go up significantly, then it could be more expensive from an interest rate standpoint. But it would appear that this is probably being conservative enough that it would cost you about what this package shows or less if you're doing something in the next 12 months. If this stretches out and you're doing something 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, then all bets are off. So questions? None. All right. I'll hand it back. Thanks, Dan.
You have to
Switch this.
share your screen again too.
Okay.
Okay. Lots of information there on the financial piece of how all these projects work. Great thing, interest rates are low. As Matt mentioned, that's just more money that goes towards your school and the education of your students and the facilities for those students, as opposed to whoever the investor is that's buying those bonds. One other thing related to costs. Yes, right now we have incredibly low interest rates. This is a chart based on construction cost history. Waiting never gets you a project that is less expensive. And that's what the intent of this chart here is trying to show you with if we use 2019 as our last year of what I would call normal construction. 2020, we saw a lot of ups and downs in material prices, and those are still kind of trending off. But if we use 2019 as our basis, you can see that a $10 million project in 2019 would have only been $7.29 million in 2011. Likewise, as we tried to project forward, that same $10 million project in 2019 and 2025, that would be a $12.3 million project, just with normal escalation costs in construction. All right, Now we're going to get to talking about some ideas, things that maybe you've heard before, things that maybe you haven't, stuff that might be a little bit emotional, cause a little bit of tension in the room. But the idea is we want to get these ideas out, have some discussion, have some thought, get some feedback on what may or may not be possible here for the school. So we've created 5 options for you to look at here. These, again, very high level for discussion, thought in this process. A, B, C, D, and E. Option A is just remain and maintain. We're not going to do anything other than just keep with our normal maintenance plan that we've been doing. We're not going to realign any grades. We're not going to make any significant improvements. We're just going to fix the roofs when they need fixed. We're going to fix the heating and cooling when they need fixed. Those kinds of pieces. So that is option A. Option B, renovate and update all buildings. So all of the buildings and all those bullet points that we listed, that would be captured in a larger project. You get more efficiency when you do a larger project from a construction standpoint and a dollars per square foot standpoint. Option C, renovate and reorganize buildings. That is an option where what we're looking at there is, we have more slides with these details, right? I'll show you what that is in just a second. Option D, consolidate buildings. Perhaps we need to look at a scenario where if we've got too much square footage across the district, how can we reduce expenses, bring more people under fewer buildings, kind of a fewer and newer scenario. And then option E is build all new buildings and across your district here. So that's probably not a scenario that is realistic for you, particularly after you look at some of the financial pieces that Matt presented, but that question is always out there. So we wanted to show you what that looks like in that scenario. And if that's something you want to get to in a master plan, we have further discussion on it. So option A, remain and maintain. All the schools are maintained in the condition they currently are. You fix things as they need fixed, as I mentioned. The students remain exactly as they are in their existing facilities. It's just maintaining that status quo based on the facilities assessment. We're just going to keep that status quo. And that is certainly an option that if you as a school district say, you know, we've put some money in our buildings, we built a new elementary, it's time to we just want to keep where we're at for a while. That's certainly an option that's out there. Option B, renovate and update all schools. Again, we capture a lot of those bullet point lists of the things that are going to be needed from now throughout that kind of 10-year time frame. We do those renovations all under one project, but again, we're not changing programmatically where you're at from where the students are going, as far as what buildings they're in, capturing any of that existing square footage, maximizing any of that existing square footage. Option C, this is where we're probably going to start having some of this ideas for discussion as we move forward. Renovate and reorganize your program in your different buildings. So again, that chart that I gave you with the top down, where you have more square footage here in this 80,000 square foot high school building. You have some excess square footage in your current middle school building, and you have an elementary building that's pretty well at capacity. The high school here would become a 7-12 building. All right, so that takes 7th grade through 12th grade, all in this 80,000 square feet here. The middle school building would become a 4-5-6 building. That takes away then the pressure and the square footage concerns that we may have at your elementary building, and that becomes a pre-K through 3 building. Now, obviously, there are other challenges that are created with that, and we can go through a list of pros and cons or have some discussion on that, particularly with teachers and certifications and any type of paras that you may share at the elementary level. That means there's less efficiency in that when you have your elementary grades divided up by that. But what this does is it spreads out your students amongst the square footage you have. So that maximizes your existing square footage in all of your facilities. That is option C. Option D would be to consolidate buildings. So this may be a scenario where we go through a process to determine which buildings should remain, which buildings possibly would be lower on the list to remain, something that would be closed in the future. Determine what additions may be needed to accommodate that. So for example, if you're going to look at this 80,000 square feet and this wants to become a 6 through 12 building or a 5 through 12 building, how do you do that in this particular building, keeping the elementary building as is, and perhaps the middle school building is the building that is the surplus building. So you're going to a fewer and newer scenario. These buildings would get renovated and updated as one project. And then your students relocate to these newly consolidated buildings. So that is option D. Option E, build an all new pre-K 12 building. Again, as we've heard Matt talk about where you're at financially in your district, you have a brand new elementary building. Perhaps this is not the best option, but it is something that we usually throw out there so everybody can see what that option is, so that in the future, you know, when discussion is had on why didn't we look at just building one pre-K 12 building to get the most efficiency we could out of our district, our teachers, our people who do all of our maintenance, our food service, all of that. This is an option that can solve that problem. As we get down the road and we start talking about costs associated with all of these, you'll see that this probably is not an option that works for you. If this is the long-term master plan of the district, however, this is what a goal that we would work towards. So that is option E. So again, option A through E, and we're going to jump into a survey here in a minute, where we're going to ask you some of those questions on goals and objectives, balancing aspirations, and then we're going to ask you to go through the process of talking about these ideas to stimulate discussion and where you feel any of these ideas may be as you move forward with this process. So again, A is remain and maintain exactly as you are. Option B, renovate and update all of the schools with the existing program in every building the way you have it right now. Option C is renovate and reorganize. Again, the scenario we threw out there is the high school becomes a 7-12, the middle school becomes a 4-6 building, and the elementary is a pre-K 3 building. Option D is to reduce one of your buildings. You're going to get to a 2-building scenario. And then option E is an all new pre-K 12 building. So if you have your smartphone, we'd like you to get it out and go to menti.com. Once you get to menti.com, you're going to enter this code 7186-8814. And again, it's going to take you through a series of questions. If you do not have a smartphone here tonight and need a paper copy, raise your hand and we'll get you a paper copy. So again, for those in participating via Zoom, we'd also like you to go to that website and menti.com and enter the code and take the survey. Code from menti.com is 7186-8814. there's a submit button. We do not have the next community engagement meeting scheduled yet. One question that we usually get in this process is kind of related to schedule. We don't have an overall schedule here to show you, but if you go through this process with community engagement and the ideas to stimulate discussion and we refine those, we get to a point where the community says, yes, we support a particular project and implementing that and making that recommendation to the school board. If that requires a property tax levy or a bond issue, you can't just say, hey, we want to have a bond issue election and we're going to do that next month. The state has dictated when those elections can occur. If we were to get to a point where that were a conclusion that the community has and wants to support, the first one available here coming up is in September. That one is not something that's a realistic goal. There's another one in November. After that, it would be March of next year. If you run a bond issue and it fails, you have to wait 6 months. So for example, if we run a bond issue in September, and I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, that's not what anybody's decided, but if that were to happen and it fails, you have to wait 6 months. Unfortunately, that March election date does not quite hit that 6-month waiting time period, and so you have to wait an entire year before you can run another bond election. So if we were to go through this process and it was determined you want to try and hit that September date, we would want to wrap up this community engagement process and have recommendations to the school board by the end of June. That gives then the school board enough time to collect signatures and do all of their pieces that they need to do legally to call for that election. Is that clear on the schedule piece there? So again, the next community meeting is not scheduled yet, but I'm certain there will be one. We'll go through the results of this, and we want to continue this process so that the facilities committee has a good understanding of where the community is at, where the support is at, for any future facilities improvements, and can make a recommendation to the school. So with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that anybody has, and any that we may have gotten via Zoom here. Okay. Yes.
Are there any classrooms in middle school right now not being used?
The question is, are there any classrooms in the middle school right now that are not being used? And I don't have the exact answer for that.
from a programmatic standpoint. I don't know, is the middle school principal?
Yes, they're all being used, but not during the full school day. There are rooms open through different periods of the school day.
Can you repeat that?
So the question is, are there rooms at the middle school that are not being used? The rooms are being used, but not necessarily
The whole day.
the whole day, so it's not scheduled for the entire day. Yes. Who is on the facilities committee? If anybody's on the facilities committee here, could you raise your hand? No, that's not the entire facilities committee. Want to explain?
I want to say
that
there's about
process at all?
15. I want to say off the top of my head, there's 15 or 18 of us. There's 5 or 6 that said they would be a resource. And I think 5 or 6 declined, but we try to get a cross section of all the communities, all businesses, agriculture, people that had kids in school, people that didn't have kids in school. Just try to get an overall cross section of the community. When I say that, I say school community on the facility committee.
So would you get a list out to us? So if we want to visit with one of them, we could.
The question is, can we get a list of the facility committee members out to the public so they can visit with it? And the answer I would say is yes. And we'll get that published and probably put it on our website. And then that is the purpose too of a committee member, is to be some of the eyes and ears in this conversation. And people have questions, so trying to keep them informed as well as the community and this community-based driven conversation. And I'll say community, and I'm not saying a town, I'm saying school community when I say community. The Nodaway Valley community.
I guess the question I have,
Yes.
if I can ask, what started this discussion? You know, was it the physical condition of the buildings? Is it teacher? Is it budget? What started the discussion? I guess a curious question I have. And the second question I have is, you know, in the survey, it talks about teacher retention. You know, so are funds going to be freed up to go to teacher pay? And how are they going to benefit from this? I guess teachers, I guess is the question I have, if we do something. So
I'm going to repeat questions and answer as we go. Fair enough? So what started this conversation? I came here 2 years ago, believe it or not. It's been that fast since time has flown. And it started a conversation of looking at what's the best plan to do some things with our buildings and ADA compliance, locker rooms, restrooms was an initial start of that. And then when I entered the district, I think Jack and I spent 3 or 4 days walking buildings, roofs all the way down to mechanicals and seeing other needs that weren't in assessment that was presented the June 30th prior to me entering on July 1. So that part of it started, you know, how do we approach this? How do we engage our community in this? And here's our needs. The statement made about teacher retention, that is a general fund. I won't say obligation because we're not talking about a bond, but it's a general fund cost and paying 80% of everybody that's employed here. How do you be competitive with a metro? We're so close to it, like a Waukee. And we're in the midst of negotiations, and I think it's fair to say that we are looking at how to get competitive salaries, but not break the bank and put the district in an unspent budget or authority, which is illegal. You will not be a school district very long if you're doing that. So you can't overextend yourself. Okay? So to pay for the lights today is a general fund obligation. To put LED high bay lights in this gym saved you X amount of dollars, which is a reoccurring savings, which would, if nothing else changed, would grow your authority to be able to spend money in the general fund. I.e., be a little more competitive in yourselves. Okay? So the other scenario that we have is our declining enrollment. And we've had discussions that we know over time, we've had a steady decline in enrollment. That student decline has lessened the amount of money that we get in the general fund on an annual basis by the state. So we have to match our staff with our current student enrollment as we go. I'm just gonna say it because I'll pick on the superintendent. You don't have a full-time superintendent. He's shared with 2 school districts. You've cut your superintendent cost at half. You've also generated some revenue because you shared. So there's other ways to do things, but obviously when you talk about facilities, when you have to pay for the lights, the water, you don't have to pay for the natural gas anymore out of the general fund. You have to pay for an extra administrator for every building. You got to pay for custodians in every building. You got to pay for cooks in every building. You got to pay secretaries in every building. Those, when you get down to fewer buildings, those are things that become natural cost cutting savings, which gives you more money or less pressure on your general fund for a while until either enrollment steadies, increases, and if it unfortunately keeps going down, you're going to have other conversations later. Did I answer every question in that conversation?
I'll ask the same question. Are there any classroom rooms not being used in the high school right now?
So are there any classrooms in the high school not being used?
The answer is no, but next year when we we have 3 social studies teachers right now. If we go down to 2, there would be 1 classroom that would open up because of that, but not currently.
So the answer currently is no. And this forecasting the schedule for next year, there will at least be 1 classroom open
All day.
all day.
All day.
With the Orient people coming here next year, what does that do to our numbers?
When Orient Expert sends kids to our building next year, what's that do to our numbers? It increases our numbers served for students, but it won't increase class capacity at this time. Anticipated numbers are a few kids here and there for particular classes. We are going to try to work on that in about 2 weeks, try to get some more things finalized tonight.
So what happens in 5 to 10 years from Orient?
What's the question?
So when Orient, say in 5 to 10 years, decides that they can't maintain their building, they're gonna have to disperse. You know, that we're gonna get a portion of those, portion of our, we're gonna get arrested.
So what happens in 5 years if Orient Expert students don't continue in the, I'll say the path that they're going right now, things change. I can't predict that, but we would have to have those conversations and see which ones are coming our way and which ones are going someplace else. I mean, you can estimate, but I'm not gonna say that's where we're headed right now. Orient Expert's intent is to do things to be Orient Expert as long as they can be.
And the average class is how many students
At Orient,
here?
here, what's the average class here? Between,
Yeah, we got some bigger classes right now, so I would say something between 55 and 60.
so the answer to the average class size right now, estimated is about 55 or 60.
Paul, one thing that would happen if any district dissolved and started coming here, one advantage would be you get their sales tax. You don't get it right now. So if kids are coming here from Orient, you're getting the general funding, the state aid, followed follows the kid wherever they go. So that's helping you. So if there's anybody here that wishes kids from Orient Maxburg or some other district wouldn't come here, you should stop wishing that, because that is in fact what is helping you continue to pay the number of teachers that you have. And if you didn't have the money from those kids, there is a possibility that you'd have to eliminate a history teacher or a science teacher or something, because you wouldn't have that money. But you're not getting the sales tax money from those kids now, because that money goes to where the child's house is. And since Orient Maxburg is still a district, they get the sales tax money.
What are our students saying? You know, have they said anything?
We have future steps.
What the question is, what are our students saying? And at this time, these are very initial beginning conversations.
Here.
At some point in time,
We talk about surveys that we'll send out to students eventually.
take input from the students.
We talk about surveys that we'll send out to students.
I've done that.
I understand that lessening the number of buildings helps in a lot of expense. But due to the fact that we've got a new elementary and the middle school in very old, what building are we eliminating?
What building are we eliminating is the question, and the conversations haven't been had yet. That's about, I think, the simplest answer. That's why we're doing these things, getting input. And maybe that's a path we take, and maybe that's not a path we take. These are stimulating questions, and been around Derek enough right now to say that these are still high-level conversations, and we're not down into brass tacks.
In our junior high and our high school, what are we shorting our kids compared to other schools right now? What are we shorting them right now because of our current budget? And what do you foresee in the future of possibility of having to not give our kids the education that's competitive out there?
So the question, I think, is a little more complicated answer, but I'll try to help you out here. The question is, what's in our current junior high and high school in programs, and what are we shorting our kids because of a limited budget? Well, my answer is every kid in the state of Iowa gets a free public education. By chapter 12, we have certain things we have to meet every year for every kid. If you don't do that, you're not an accredited school. So we're an accredited school. So we meet all the bare minimums. Do we have I'll just say, a flashy water polo team? No, we don't have a swimming pool. I mean, I don't know what your interests are, what you want. You know, we have other things like we emphasize, for example, we have 2 IT teachers. Okay, and by the numbers in participation, we were reducing that to 1.5. But we're going to share, you know, so we can keep a 2 full-time between 2 school districts. I mean, that's something that most schools don't have. So I don't know if I can answer your question specifically, but it's kind of, you know, do we have French, Spanish, and Russian? No. We don't have that. They have Spanish on an online system, and our kids get their Spanish accredited, and they can do that. I think what maybe is a better thought process is, are kids equipped to do what they need to do after high school? So far, I'm going to say the answer to that is yes. Now, can we continue to do the things we're doing if we keep spending money that, you know, we don't with our own, the answer we don't. So when you're still 2 sections and everything, you have some other options. But you have to be thoughtful about how those things happen when they happen.
One of the options was to make high school a 7 through 12 building with 1 classroom coming open. Will this building support a 7 through 12 class?
I'm going to say the question and see if I can ask the question correctly. Is what would happen in this building if 712 with just 1 classroom coming open?
If we turn this to a 7 through 12 building, Mr. Fleetwood said there'll be 1 classroom open next year. With that 1 classroom open, will outlay to support a 7 through 12 building.
Further answer to you, but I think it's gonna be square footage. It depends on your top down.
So we have not looked at the full bottom-up version of that. It may be that you are short classrooms. I can tell you that with a lot of the school districts that we work with that are your size and even bigger, the trend is to get to a 7-12 scenario with 7th grade through 12th grade all under one roof. There are a lot of efficiencies in sharing 7 through 12. Those younger kids getting involved in your ag programs, your industrial arts, having 1 or 2 great science labs in the high school for 7-12 versus a couple of just general science labs in multiple buildings. It also gets those kids exposed to the older kids, and that is a piece of the community pride piece that you also see. So programmatically, I would need to look at the schedule, and I would also need to look at the schedule for both the current middle school and the high school to see if there are ways to make that happen. We do see some of those schools going to scheduling in the classrooms, where if you have a classroom that has traditionally been social studies, for example, 4 periods during the day, maybe social studies, it may be literature, reading, or something like that in the remaining 4 periods, and teachers have to travel between the classrooms as well in order to be as efficient as possible in those scenarios. We also have an auditorium, which has been utilized this year under COVID, but we would traditionally suggest things like auditoriums need to be used for lectures and classroom space also during the school week and not just for performances. There was a question earlier about asking students what they think. We do have a survey that we're working on to send out to faculty and to students, similar to the Menti one that you guys have seen here, to gather some initial feedback from those 2 demographics. Yes.
I have a question. What is your percentage of cut for if we were to do this and get a big grant? What's your percentage of cut would you make off of it?
So you're asking,
As a company, your company.
yes. You're asking me what my fees are to do this?
Yes.
Okay. My fees, I charge a basic fee for the facilities assessment. And I can't remember off the top of my head what that is because I don't do that piece of it in my office. I do these meetings. I can get that information for you. If the facility study and the community engagement leads to a project, whatever that project is, then we charge a percentage of the construction. And so that is 7 to 9%, depending upon whether it is renovation or new construction. We went through a process where we interviewed, submitted a proposal, interviewed with the school board, and were selected based on qualifications and a fee proposal that we proposed during the interview. Are there any questions from Zoom?
What are the rough projected costs of building upkeep if we do nothing for the next 5, 10, 20 years? And what would be the ramifications of that direction?
What was the last part of that question?
What would be the ramifications of that direction?
Okay, the question on Zoom is, what are some of the costs associated with doing nothing over the next 10 years? So we did put some numbers on these slides for reference. So the elementary building, again, a very minimal cost. We predicted you could have up to $500,000 between your secure entry and some ADA things on the outside of the building, mostly with parking and concrete. 10-year maintenance costs at $50,000 a year, just as an example of costs associated with maintaining a building. That's at the elementary building. At the middle school, we've got, for this list on here that goes through 10 years, a range of $2.2 to $4 million. If you wanted to look at a complete renovation of a facility like that, for comparison, $7.2 million to $8.4 million. Here at the high school, again, with the bullet points of lists of things that we've heard and observed as things to be aware of over the next 10 years, you have a range of 7.2 to 9.3 million, where a complete renovation would be 14 to 18 million dollars. And again, these numbers are high-level looks. We do a lot of square footage calculations. We pull out anything that is significant as far as expenses in the buildings and bullet point those. But this is something that you could expect to spend if you capture all those things, you know, in a 10 plus year time frame. So what was that what was the second part of that question?
What would be the ramifications if we went?
So what would be the ramifications if you didn't spend that money? Deferred maintenance just kick the can down the road. So if it costs you $10,000 a year in annual roof maintenance, inspections, repairs and upgrades, and you decide you're not going to do that for 5 years, you want to bank that $50,000 for something else. Maybe something else that takes priority. At year 6, you know, that lack of maintenance could be a $100,000 item because of water getting into an area on a building or a roof, because you deferred that maintenance. That's an example of a ramification of that. You can continue to maintain your heating and cooling system as long as you can get parts and people to work on it. So just because our manuals and our inspections show that you're getting to the end of life on a heating and cooling system or a boiler, and we've been in schools where boilers have a lifespan of 30 years, and they're coming up on year 40 and 45 for some of those boilers. They're still able to get some parts for them. They're not very efficient. You know, you cross your fingers when you have your boiler inspections every single year, but that's what you do sometimes as a school district. Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions here? I will stick around afterwards if you have a question or if you think of something you want to ask me, or any of the administration. We'll all be here after a little bit. Thank you.